What's good? It's your boy D Black Anglo-Saxon, and I'm back again with a quick little wrap up of the Michelle Obama video. I did get a chance to post it. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it. But I did have a thread on my Facebook and my TikTok. And I think a very interesting conversation in a piggyback came up because one of my Facebook friends, shout out to Joy, made a comment or asked a question rather as to us, do we have agency? And I want to be clear when I say us, I'm splicing everything across generational lines because the conversation that Michelle Obama was having, she was having it around the fact that leadership in America is continuing to hold on to these spots, not creating or allowing for opportunities to be created up under them, and then also at the same time destroying the cycle or the natural life cycles that are supposed to exist within the labor marketplaces. And I agree with her in large part. But I think what happens is that in this conversation, we have a bad tendency to confuse agency versus capacity. And I really wanted to kind of bring it up because we have to understand that, yes, we always have agency. I will never say that we don't have agency, but we have to be really careful about whether we have the capacity. But I think the more important conversation and the more important question should always be around, do we have capacity? And I'm going to say and use the example of, because I think it's the most relative to this case, is between myself and let's say my son, right? Does my son have the agency or wherewithal to quote unquote fight me or push back in terms of a direct order that has been given or a particular set of ideologies that have been thrust upon him, etc.? Yes, he has agency to buck on all of those things, but does he have the real capacity to do it? Because then you have to ask the question, okay, if you continue to buck, where then you where then do you go after that? And then also you have to factor in different things as into, okay, my son has his own regimens. He does boxing, he does his own sports thing and his training regimens. So he might feel like he can take me in certain ways. But what he does not have control over, and this is the capacity thing, is what I do. Because part of where I see that we make the mistake in our community, especially when it comes to trying to assess and create solutions, is that we never assess the playbook of the opposing team. We have to begin to not only just respond to the things that are happening, but we have to begin to assess. So my son has to say to himself, oh, you know what? I do work out, but my dad runs a half marathon every day. My dad does strength training. My dad has a certain level of acumen and a certain level of mental capacity that even if I am stronger than him in, let's say, raw, pure strength, there are some things that I cannot compensate for because they are out of my control, because he can't control how long he's been on the earth. He can't control what I do or do not do. He can't control the environment in the way that he would wish to. And the reason why I use that example is because in a lot of ways, this conversation was had along the sociological, socio-political spectrum. And it's important that we keep in context and in frame that when we're having these type of discussions, we aren't having them within a vacuum and we aren't having them within isolation outside of what the opposing sides or the opposing or competitive, because it's not necessarily always opposition, but it is in some cases competitive, which gets into Michelle Obama's point. Because I don't think all elders are in opposition, but for the ones who are not, but they are still in competition, we have to understand that opportunities are finite. And I know a lot of people are going to push back on this conversation and say, well, everybody can, get theirs. There's always space for everybody. And again, keeping in context and keeping in frame and understanding that when Michelle Obama was having this conversation, she was having it on a societal level. And we have to understand that those things are finite at scale. And what I mean by that is, yes, everybody can start their own business. Everybody can participate, but you can start your business, but that does not mean that you are going to be a millionaire or 100,000aire, or that does not mean that your business will even succeed, because there is a high failure rate in going into entrepreneurship. So even on the political side, when we talk about these leadership roles and these leadership positions and the level of access, and we have this, again, framing it and keeping it in a frame of capacity versus agency. Yes, as a youth, as a young person, there is absolutely agency in terms of going after these spots, going after these seats, doing the actual work, organizing, infiltrating, however you want to frame it. It happens. It continues to go on. But what we cannot miss in that is the fact that when that is happening, we're also we have to get very good at understanding the intangible resources that are finite. Energy is finite. When people continue and maintain seats, that means that the person who is fighting them, do you know how much of a lift it takes, how much energy, how much social capital, how much political capital, how much actual capital it takes, like money it takes to run these? Those things go down the drain. Are they replenishable? Yes, in some ways, and in other ways, no. Because when you do that, and let's say you get a person who runs up against a god like a Hakeem Jeffries or Maxine Waters or somebody of that ilk, right? If they lose, you have exhausted your whole base. Not only just you, your whole base has exhausted itself. So yes, you have the agency to do as you please, but the capacity to do it, it factors in and it brings in a more nuanced conversation. It brings in the understanding that yes, one, we can do it, but how long can we do this thing for? At which level of intensity can we do this thing for? And then the strategy around how we do this particular thing, because some tasks require finesse and others require brute force. And that's the other conversation. A lot of what our elders have gotten stuck into is one level of mastery in terms of the weaponry that they're allowed to use or the tactics that they're allowed to use. They are only allowed to use quote unquote finesse or quote unquote acquiesce. And in that, you lose a certain level of practicality, because if all you are or can do is acquiesce or use finesse, you become predictable in that way. And so we have to really be careful about being able to just say, yes, we can do it, which is the agency part. Like, yes, we can. We can almost do anything that we want, right? That's neither here nor there. That's an easy question to answer. That's an easy thing to decide on and come to the conclusion of. The more nuanced or the better question is the capacity. Because here we are continuing to do a number and all of the things that continue to put us back in these same positions as an overall community don't allow us the space to actually move forward as a whole body. Because how you move forward is also a capacity conversation. Because I, as one individual, can make it. I, as one individual, can get to the bag. I, as one individual, can do a lot of things, but that one individual cannot affect certain environments at scale. Because again, going back to the analogy of my son, he can't affect his environment the way that I can. And I know a lot of people want to believe that they can do whatever, but at the same time, you also have to understand that your government, these organizations, these NGOs, these corporations, they have influenced the environment in ways that limit the capacity. So when we look at technology, for all of the good that it has done, we also have to factor in the fact that we have fractured our community on generational levels, on levels of gender, and on levels of class. And then because we have introduced technology in the way that we have, we now have a specific space and gap in communication because we aren't necessarily meeting at the same rates. And when we are meeting online or in spaces that don't necessarily allow you to get the full interaction and full spectrum of human engagement. And that leaves gaps in how one can organize. Because you also have to, again, when you're having this conversation of capacity versus agency and how they meet and how they intertwine, you have to think about what plays are being ran against you. And you cannot just say, well, we're going to run this play, we're going to run this play, we're going to run this play. You have to think about what the other team is doing and going for. And yes, the society is sectioned off in teams. There are teams within teams on your side, and then there are teams within teams as a whole on the opposite side, the opposing side. For example, everybody on the Republican side doesn't agree with the tactics and the way in which they are approaching the ball game. But what they do agree is that this is where we want to get to and this is where we want to go to. And so we have a situation where we don't have elders who not only can walk off into the sunset, but because they have played the ball game out the way that they have, they don't even have the ability and capacity to, let's say, put a person on in the way that Charlie Kirk was, because they still have to remain competitive at a certain rate. So when you see people like Charlie Kirk, or when you see a lot of these right-wing Nick Fuentes and all of those people, they, to some extent, have been able to leverage not only the ecosystem of human capacity, but in Charlie Kirk's case, like Turning Point USA and all of that, they getting backed by big players. And those big players understand that, look, this part of the ball game is not for me, is not for us. Our brand, the way that we fight, is in a different way, is in a different manner. And we're not going to enter the game in that way. But what we're going to do is we're going to empower a Charlie Kirk, put him in position, and you play ball on this terrain. It still advances us to the same goal, but you play ball this way, because in this space, some of us have to be more measured. Some of us have to be more of the acquiescent finesse brand, right? Which is cool. And that's why, again, we have to parse this out, because a lot of people hear what I say and it's like, oh, why are you against this? Why are you against this? It's not that I'm against it. Is that we have to get better at assessing when we're going to use what tool to do what we need to do. And if we have the capacity to do so, and if we need to reassess and figure out ways to, if we don't, how do we create the capacity? Because that then becomes the next conversation. Because we don't always have the capacity. But okay, that's fine. But then how do we have the capacity? But you can't have that conversation if everybody's first inclination and only thing to say to everything is, well, we can do it, and everybody's just throwing spaghetti at the wall, watching it slide down, and we find ourselves back at square one. It doesn't work. It's not going to work like that. And we also have to be honest about, again, when we are having these discussions about quote unquote creating pipelines, et cetera, because I know some people will say, well, I've done that. And my question to you would be, are you still holding on to the agenda though? Because it's one thing to put somebody out front, it's one thing to have a face of something, but are you still controlling the agenda? Because that in itself is a huge, huge point. Because if you're still controlling the agenda, you're still controlling what tactics are being used, etc. That is not you getting out the way. That's you extracting labor and managing from afar, which again is not bad. But for the sake of this conversation, do we need to reassess that? Because everybody want to tell me about Trump, everybody want to tell me about racism, everybody want to tell me about all of these different things, but you all have no response to them. And the response is not there because we continue to use the same plays while the opposition is evolving and adapting. Because that's why you always also hear me talk about older instances, because they are missed opportunities. Because what we also have to keep in mind is that things evolve as we throw rocks at the machine or the armor, right? When we do these things, for example, you always hear me bring up the gig economy. You always hear me bring up the Julian Assange situation, the Edward Snowden situation, the NFL situation, because all of those were missed opportunities when chinks in the armor were showing and glaring. But what happens is again, you give the opposition, the competitor, to go back and say, I didn't even realize that piece of the armor was open. Let's fix that. And not only do we fix that, we're going to figure out a way to use it, weaponize it, and create and shift the environment and the capacity for them, the other opposing side, whatever or whoever. You can assign it how you want, but understanding that opposing side is going to say, how do I keep this from even being and getting to a fight? I don't even want it to even get close. So I'm going to create a system, I'm going to create ecosystems around everything that I'm doing to undermine your ability to do so. So when the opportunity is missed, you lose capacity. You lose capacity at every single point that you miss an opportunity to jab and twist inside of the armor to pry it off. Because they're going to go back, retool, and revamp the armor. They're going to go back and figure out, how did we miss that chink in the armor? And in that, you lose capacity. Do you lose agency? No. But you do lose capacity. And you need to focus on capacity. Capacity and competency is highly important. Again, the conversation around agency is just, can we do it? Yeah, you can do it, but how effective is it? How effective is what you're doing? You can do it. You can run into the burning building, but how effective are you? Are you trained for that? Do you have the knowledge and the wherewithal for that? Are you willing to even say that you don't know and don't understand? Because a lot of people sit up here and they watch, or we'll have these conversations, and they'll say, well, what's the solution? Part of the solution is understanding what you don't know. Because when you all are looking and watching these politicians or whoever you watch and speak, even if it's not me, understand that a lot of this stuff, you're only getting a small smidget and nugget of what the person actually knows and understands, because what it is that it is being expressed is being condensed down. Because we're on platforms that are heavily monitored. We're in these spaces where you can't necessarily say everything to the full extent of what it is and how it happens, because it is so egregious in some cases. So there are so many redactions into what is being said, and you as the person who is listening have to understand what is being omitted. Because everything that's being omitted is not being omitted out of malice, it's being omitted because the way that they have organized the ecosystems, they have done so in a way to limit our capacity. Your capacity is limited when you can't even say certain words on certain platforms because it limits and reframes how you can have the conversation. That is a capacity discussion. It's not an agency discussion. You can have the conversation, but you'll be deplatformed. You'll be deranked. You can do as you want. But is the capacity there? Is the lane there? Is the door cracked open there? Do we have enough people who are on board with this ideology? All of those things are capacity issues. Again, you can run out here and whistleblow, but do we have the capacity as the American nation for whistleblowers? I would say no, because people get silenced, they get starved out, or they end up running for their lives. So we have to be really, really careful about how we're having discussions. Agency versus capacity. Stop just talking about what you can do. You can do anything you want to do. But does it make sense to do it when, where, how, and why? Because your why also matters. And also, again, keep in mind always that you're dealing with finite resources. None of this is infinite. If you've ever ran a campaign, if you've ever been a part of one, you understand that people and their energy and their time is finite. So when you're organizing and when you're building anything, you're dealing with capacity, people's capacity to have attention, people's capacity to have depth, people's capacity to have range, people's capacity to have accuracy, etc. And the solution is being able to first understand all, maybe not all, but most of the nuances. Because you're fighting against bodies that are highly intelligent, highly efficient, highly organized. Not going up against dummies. Just because you don't agree with them don't mean they stupid. Stop thinking that. Do you have the capacity to not be emotional in a highly rigid game? Because people are making decisions not based on emotion. This is a numbers thing. The society is being looked at like a spreadsheet. So all of your, oh my God, people are, no. That's not what's happening. Do you have the capacity to do that, the conversation? And again, it's all in love. It's all in care. But please be cognizant of that when you're having any conversation, whether it's this gender conversation, whether it's how you engaging in politics, whether it's how you engaging in your corporate endeavors, your work life, your relational life, your I'm about to buy some shoes or capacity. I can go out here and probably buy a BMW. Do I have the capacity to do it? I have the agency. Do I have a capacity? Hell no. Absolutely. Maybe for a month, but true capacity is also over time. But, what do I know? Let me know what y'all think in the comments. Catch y'all another time. Enjoy your holiday.